seen it, if you go to the IGF website, this is the workshop for organisers of, this is the roundtable for organisers of workshops in the Enhancing Digital Trust and the Internet and Human Rights workshops. If you go to the IGF schedule, you'll see a proposed draft message that we've prepared, just a few key points. Morning, Alex. And if you have a moment to reflect on those, just while we wait for others to start, I'd just encourage you to do that. Thanks. Okay, good morning. I think it's important not to penalise the people who arrive on time by waiting too long, for those who haven't. Good morning, my name is Joy Liddycote. I'm a human rights specialist at the Association for Progressive Communications. And welcome to this roundtable for organisers of workshops in the Enhancing Digital Trust and Human Rights in the Internet streams of IGF 2014. I thought I'd just begin by giving you a little bit of background as to how this roundtable came about, and then hand over to the ambassador from Germany for a few opening remarks in relation to Human Rights Council panel next week. Provide an opportunity for questions, comments, observations about that, and then to give workshop organisers or participants a chance to share reflections on discussions about the right to privacy here at the IGF. Then we will move to have a discussion of a proposed draft message, some suggested key messages, which, as I've mentioned, are on the IGF schedule. We might also have a discussion about the modalities for this. And then finally we'll end with a discussion of whether there are any points that participants would like to make to the IGF main session on taking stock on the way forward, just around this topic and these two workshop streams. Okay, please do come and sit at the table if you're wanting to come in. So this idea for this roundtable was conceived from a very a pure coincidence, and the pure coincidence is that next week the Human Rights Council is meeting for its 27th regular session, and it will be considering on Friday the 12th of September from 9 till 12 in the morning. It will be debating the presentation of the High Commissioner for Human Rights report in June on the right to privacy in the digital age. This is a report that was mandated by a UN General Assembly resolution calling for the Human Rights Council and the High Commissioner's Office to consider this issue in light of concerns about surveillance and the right to privacy that had arisen in 2013. So we thought, this meeting's happening next week, there's a huge event at the IGF, it would be useful to consider, is there some way that IGF participants might want to share their thoughts about this important fundamental human rights issue to the Council. So this is somewhat novel, this idea. It's mandated by the mandate of the IGF, which is to encourage inter-institutional messages from one UN mandated body to another. So of course the IGF itself is a UN mandated body, as is the Human Rights Council. It's also perhaps something we need to be creative about. We're not sure how these modalities will go, and we'd like to share some thoughts and ideas we've had about that as well. So welcome, particularly to the government, civil society, private sector, technical community participants that I can see here. Perhaps if I could hand over now to the Ambassador, perhaps to say a few comments about the panel, why it was conceived, and the concept for it. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Joy. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm Norbert Riedel. I'm the Commissioner for International Cyber Policy at the Foreign Office in Berlin, Germany. And for us, the report of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Pillay, with his unequivocal commitment to the right to privacy, is a milestone. And I'm looking very much forward to the Human Rights Council in Geneva and the panel next week. I believe the report and all the discussions following it will also contribute to enhance trust in this sphere, and I think trust is what is really needed. That is why the follow-on resolution in the third committee needs to take up central conclusions of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Let me just highlight a few of them. Jurisdiction over internet infrastructure is a core question. On the internet, people exercise the right to privacy by cross-border communication. A narrow concept of jurisdiction permits interception of potentially all communication. That would annihilate internet privacy for good. The High Commissioner for Human Rights report makes, as I think, important suggestions in that respect. The High Commissioners for Human Rights conclusions on the relevance of metadata are equally important. Depending on both amount and interlinkage, the collection of metadata may significantly interfere with the right to privacy. And I think we also need more clarity when such interference is warranted for reasons for the public good. This includes the quality of laws and administrative orders, as well as issue of transparency, control mechanisms, and remedies. I really think the High Commissioner for Human Rights gives rich guidance and very good ideas in this respect. So I think the discussion will not stop at the third committee, and we will ensure that it is taken back to the Human Rights Council afterwards. And there we also hope that there will be a very substantial and good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I noticed that we also have one of the proposed panellists who will be speaking at the Human Rights Council here. Yes, perhaps you would like to introduce yourself and make any comments.
Yeah, hello. My name is Yves Nissim. I'm with Orange and also with the Industry Dialogue. Just a word on the Industry Dialogue. The Industry Dialogue is a community of telcos and suppliers of telecommunication. We are 9, and we got together at the time of the Arab Revolution when we were asked to do things we didn't want it to do by governments to stop some networks, to send messages and all that. So we decided that we would fight and have a leverage being together a lot more than if we were alone facing the demands. So we do construct the industry dialogue, the telecom industry dialogue, worked on a set of principles based on the UN principles, and now we are trying to share best practices. When we saw the work of the High Commissioner, it really sounded very strong for us, because it was really pointing out few elements, few problems we were dealing with every day. Meaning facing our position with respect to the government's positions. So as ID, we decided to write comments and proposals for the document that actually are now included inside the document. And I guess this is the reason why I was invited to the panel, to defend those arguments just for the sake of transparency. These are the different points we try to defend. The first one was, in some countries, we do have governments which have a direct link to our networks, which is called swarm, and we would like this not to happen anymore. We'd like to keep our networks in our hands and respond to formal and transparent procedures to help governments in their work, but not have them have a direct link to our network and do things we don't even know what they're doing. So it was the first point we wanted to defend. The second one was to, as everybody's asking now, to have a clear and transparent procedure to address demands of surveilance or telecommunication information in every single country, and work from best practices from country to country. And the third one was a demand on transparency. We are committed as telcos, and you've probably seen the Vodafone report. A few months ago, we were committed to do transparency reports, but we do believe that the first issue of a transparency should come from governments. Actually, if we look at the numbers themselves, in one country, we are 3, 4, or 5 telcos working in a country. A measure of one telco doesn't mean anything. A measure coming from the government is a lot more meaningful. So these are the main area in which we're going to try to duel and dialogue with a multi-stakeholder in place in this panel.
Thank you, Yves. I just want to check if anyone has any questions about the Human Rights Council panel itself, anything that they want to know about its modalities or its procedurally, if you're unclear about how it will relate, please, if there are any questions, speak up. Okay, so we thought it might be useful then to just open up the discussion to hear from workshop organisers in the Enhancing Digital Trust and the Internet and Human Rights sessions, perhaps also from those who've attended these workshops, just to get your feedback, to share your comments on what have you been hearing about this topic of the right to privacy in the discussions? Has it been significant? Have there been any points people have strongly made or recommendations? And perhaps to share these with each other. Now, so the floor is open. Just introduce yourself and your workshop.
Yes, I'm Gry Hasselbalg from the Danish Media Council. And I've been the organizer and the chair of the workshop called Privacy as Innovation, which is the second one in a row. We had one actually also in Bali. And this workshop is a good continuation of what was just presented before, the role of businesses. It's specifically, if you look at the Commissioner's report, there's a whole section on the role of businesses. And I'll just take out some of the points, some of the main points that we had in the workshop. Of course, it addresses this whole thing of the role and responsibility of business to provide surveillance-proof technologies, if you can call that, compliant with the human rights framework. And that means to provide something that is not wiretap ready by default, that doesn't support the development of an environment that facilitates this sweeping kind of surveillance that we've seen. So the speakers, they addressed a need to reframe the conversation about privacy in both policymaking, but particularly in business evolution. Privacy, it shouldn't be viewed as in opposition to innovation, but as a more natural component of creating a solution and innovating, addressing also user demands for choice and control. So the whole point was that privacy is not only a concept but a solution, and it addresses many different things, both the way that users need to be able to control their social context and their relations and content with people, with their closest relations, but also the way that businesses handle user data backstage. So it needs to take into account, we were looking at different areas, data ownership, big data ethics, alternative business models, financial control, as well as user demands for convenience. The main point was also that there is actually a need for both social and economic investment in these more alternative solutions that build on alternative business models and privacy by design. To create what I said, this surveillance-proof technological environment that as a priority strengthens the enforcement of the right to privacy, not the surveillance on a more blanket scale. So also another point is that what we could kind of see from the two workshops we've had these 2 years was also that there are too many interpretations for what is the prerequisite for privacy standards that kind of clouds the outcome, and there's not enough alternative and truly innovative ideas of how privacy can be incorporated into digital media business development. So one very core idea from this workshop was that there is a need for an international level playing field of privacy principles. And of course we recognize that this human rights guide for businesses from 2011, but in regards to the right to privacy, there is a very, very specific need for a very detailed guideline and internationally agreed upon standards regarding the right to privacy, because business decisions today, they are core to the implementation of this right. So these were the main ideas from our workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, excellent. And if you have those in any written form, please do feel free to share them with us. Excellent, thank you. And including a specific recommendation, it's great. Any other comments, feedback, summaries? Alex.
My name is Alex, I'm from Privacy International. First, a few positive points. I was in a few workshops and on a panel on mobile trust and privacy. So in that panel, there's a lot of discussion about privacy, the need to look at the way mobile networks systems work and how to ensure that the privacy of the users is protected in the form of consent about how the information is going to be used, but also explaining further to users in general what all the information that they give to their providers is being used for. So I think those were the key points. And the other one that I attended was on the transparency. There was a few people on the panel from business who were keen to present the work they've been doing, which we welcome. But it's not enough yet at the moment. There's not enough information, these transparency reports. So that was one point that came out of it. The other point was, and it was made by GNI, is that the responsibility will come on the state as well, and not just from companies. And that needs to be the first step, and I think it's what was said just before. And it's something that came through in the High Commissioner's report as well. So I think there's a lot of reflection of what was said in the report and discussions that have been happening here. Maybe just a broader comment. I attended the opening ceremony and patiently waited until the 20th speaker, so the last speaker, before privacy was even mentioned. And not in detail, it was just privacy needs to be protected. So in terms of the broader issues being discussed, possibly by what we by states and what maybe some would consider the higher level stakeholders in these discussions, privacy is still not on their agenda as a main issue.
Thank you. Sorry, I have Henriette, who I should have introduced, as the MAG member that's been supporting and anchoring this roundtable. Henriette.
Thanks, Joy. Henriette Esterhuizen from APC. Just responding to Alex's report about the workshop that dealt with mobile. We were involved in an Internet Governance Forum in South Africa region recently, where information was shared that the community, that is the people who really are being victimized by fraud that is perpetrated as a result of lack of protection for privacy, particularly for pay-as-you-go mobile users, really reaches the poorest of the poor. And a lot of this is bank fraud, it's insurance scam fraud, and reaches people who are not familiar with contractual relationships, who very easily provides their identity numbers over the phone, for example, in exchange for some deal that they are promised. And the fiscal regulation, the Financial Services Board, has instructed banks to only pursue mobile-related fraud if it's over $50,000. So there's this massive, it's apparently millions and millions of cases per year of fraud resulting from lack of protection of privacy, particularly for pay-as-you-go customers, but not only pay-as-you-go customers, and there's no recourse whatsoever. Banks then generally instruct their customers to close the account and open a new one. That's the standard response at the moment.
Thanks, Henriette. Yves?
Yeah, just a comment on Alex's report. I'm very glad to see that mobile internet is being addressed at the IGF. We're trying as the idea to propose such a panel in which many times mobile networks have been shut down, and many attempts to take over or to shut down SMS have been made in our country in which we operate. The panel was not accepted, so I'm glad we've had other panels dealing with the same problem. But just to let you know that mobile data in the country in which we operate, which is Africa and Middle East, is over 80% of the internet access. So I hope next issue of the IGF will be able to deal a little more about the subject.
Sounds like a recommendation for our taking stock and going forward main session. Thank you. So we've had a number of sort of business focused ones come up. Ricky?
Thank you. My name is Ricky Frank Jørgensen. I'm from the Danish Human Rights Institute. Just a few observations with regard to human rights during these past days, not only related to privacy, but human rights more generally. When I first looked over the schedule, I haven't participated to IGF for a couple of years. I was a bit disappointed because it seemed like human rights weren't as firmly on the agenda as I saw them a couple of years ago. But then while being here, I realized that they have been there, but they haven't maybe been as directly addressed in the program, and definitely not in the plenary session. However, they have sort of mainstreamed into a lot of topics. I participated in two workshops where they were very much on the spot. One was the Internet Rights and Principles Coalition, the discussion on the Charter on Human Rights Online, and the Council of Europe Guide on Internet Users' Rights, that are both directly related to the discussion on how human rights apply in an online context. And I would say the main takeout from both those sessions were that we've come a long way in terms of standard setting, of translating standards, but the really core issue now is the various challenges that groups are facing with regard to national implementation and with regard to access to remedies in particular. A strong focus on access to remedy, or rather lack of access to remedies, and the role that both private sector and government play in this regard is really a cross-cutting theme in both of these two workshops. Then I participated in a workshop I thought was really interesting on ICANN and human rights, that reflected on the recent report that has been made on how ICANN's procedures and practices have human rights implications in a number of arenas, in response to a report that came out in June. And I think that report was also a really important document, because it really makes the case very clear that what ICANN does have human rights implications in the number of arenas, and the current structures lack the safeguards that we would normally expect. So I think that was also, for me, that was maybe the most important workshop in terms of feeding my knowledge on, okay, here's really an arena where discussions are moving and where a lot of stuff is happening right at the moment. And I mean, a lot of the discussions around ICANN are focusing on transparency and the IANA transition, etc. But I think it's very important that people that are concerned about human rights in this context really focus on this work, because I think there's a momentum right now that we need to leverage very strong in all the arenas that we have access to. Then lastly, I've participated in 2 or 3 workshops that were all called something around intermediary liability or platform responsibility or online services, that address the role of private companies vis-a-vis human rights. And I think one main point that I took out of those was that it seems that industry, since the Global Network Initiative and also with the industry dialogue, have focused a lot on their role vis-a-vis human rights, upholding human rights standards in relation to requests they receive from governments. So a strong focus on situations where they are being pressured by governments, but not the same focus on how their business practices themselves affect freedom of expression and privacy when it's not related to an interception request or a request of having direct access, or maybe to even shut down networks, but more the general business models and the effect they have, and the lack of human rights impact assessment of these practices on a more daily procedural level was one of the takeout that I noticed as important. And it goes for ISPs, of course, but it also goes for a variety of online platforms and services more broadly on the internet.
Thanks, Ricky. I mean, it's certainly open to participants if they wish to propose a main session on human rights at the IGF. If that's a proposal people want to make, then they can. Alex, in response?
Yeah, just in response to the last few comments, there's been a lot of focus on business and how they've been engaging in the IGF, and it just seems a bit disappointing that now that we're supposed to have a multi-stakeholder process, that it's civil society and industry leading this discussion at the IGF, and states haven't made, a visible contribution to the discussion, and not even the ones that have been supporting some of the UN resolutions that have been really welcomed at the Human Rights Council, but possibly haven't been reflected here at the IGF, and that's possibly a suggestion to encourage states who are leading the discussions to also lead the discussions here at the IGF on related issues.
Thank you for that concrete suggestion. We'll make sure we've got notes on that. Others? Scott?
I'm Scott Busby, and I guess on that note, I'll intervene. I'm from the U.S. Department of State, the Human Rights Bureau there. And of course, we continue to remain very interested and engaged in the privacy discussion. We're very committed to privacy and grateful for the High Commissioner's report, although we do not yet have formal positions on the many issues and recommendations in that report, or what the next appropriate step might be in light of the report. That said, we're very committed to engaging with all stakeholders in the process of analyzing the report and discussing next steps. We will participate in the panel discussion at the Human Rights Council. There will be a U.S. expert on the panel, although she does not represent the U.S. government in any way. Sarah Cleveland, professor of international law from Columbia University, will be there, and she's done a lot of thinking about these issues, and we're interested in hearing what she has to say. I would say that, as was the case at the General Assembly last year and at the Human Rights Council session in March, we would very much like to see a consensus outcome on whatever is done after the panel discussion. We think that's important, and we're prepared to do our best to try to achieve that consensus. To that end, we believe quite strongly that a very deliberate process of considering the report, as will be done during the panel discussion, and then discussing next steps would be important. So we would like to avoid rushing to judgment on the report and what is the next appropriate step. We think it makes sense to have the panel discussion, to digest the results of that panel discussion, to then have a discussion and negotiation in the context of the General Assembly, and then at some point down the line to consider what might be the next appropriate step to take. I know that some NGOs have already called for creation of a special rapporteur on privacy, I think including Privacy International. We do not yet have a position on that recommendation. The view we do have, though, is that should such a special rapporteur be created, we think it would be very important for the mandate of that rapporteur to be a broad one when it comes to privacy, because privacy entails not only digital privacy, but includes rights to reproductive health. It includes things like one's sexual preferences, one's gender identity. So we think ensuring that the mandate is broad enough to take account of those sorts of things is important. And of course, in many governments, intrusions on the right to privacy are much more, if you will, less subtle than perhaps some of the digital issues that are of concern at present. We have governments around the world who are directly intruding on people's homes, on people's family life, and we think it's important that any mandate give a special rapporteur the ability to look at those sorts of issues as well as issues of privacy in the digital realm. I'm really interested to hear what sort of discussions there were at this IGF about the issue. I must say, as to be expected, most of the workshops and panels I participated in, the issue of surveillance and U.S. practices did come up, and we continue to work hard on these issues. I mean, President Obama obviously last January laid out a reform agenda on these issues for the U.S. I think of perhaps greatest significance to the international community is the President's commitment to seek to extend U.S. privacy protections or privacy protections that pertain to U.S. citizens to all citizens of the world. We are in the process of still discussing and deliberating on how to do that. It's not something that is easily done, but it is something that President Obama has committed to the United States to, and that will be something that we will certainly bring to the discussion on privacy at the Human Rights Council and in the General Assembly, and we of course welcome the thoughts and recommendations of all stakeholders in developing this sort of new approach to global privacy. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. It's very, very helpful, giving some texture and nuance to the panel, Human Rights Council panel discussions, and particularly for those who haven't been aware that there have been some discussions and suggestions about a new mandate, such as a special rapporteur on the right to privacy. I'm not sure if these have come up specifically in this IGF or not. I just want to just quickly check, is there anyone on remote participation? Chi? No? Okay. Any other comments? Nicole? Sure, just introduce yourself, please.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Nicolas Seidler, Internet Society. So I'd like to very briefly report on a workshop we co-organized with CDT on Tuesday. The workshop was about the implications of post-Snowden, of some of post-Snowden proposals which relate more specifically to making it mandatory for companies to locate their servers in the countries they want to serve. So for example, we've seen a few measures or initiatives that would seek to, again, if you're Facebook and you want to provide services to citizens in country X, you would have to actually physically build servers in those countries. So the goal of the session was to, first of all, assess whether those measures would be effective in reducing foreign surveillance, and secondly, to see whether there would be any other chilling effects or side effects, whether good or bad. In a nutshell, the conclusion was that a big focus on the geographic location of data would be unlikely to make much improvements to address external surveillance for many reasons. For example, there still are extraterritorial legal means to access the data, even if the servers are located abroad. And depending on the case, these measures might have further negative implications on user choice. There are many cases, many reasons why people might want to host their data in another country, because that other country may have better privacy protections, for example, or a better service. So on user choice, that may have an impact. And as well, it could actually increase capacities for domestic surveillance on citizens. So basically, the conclusion was that, well, as we all know, there is no silver bullet to address external surveillance, but that technical restrictive measure or a big focus on the geographical location of data will likely be ineffective if they are mandatory. On the technical side, it was felt it's probably more useful to limit the number of people that have access to your data rather than increase. Examples were given on the usefulness to explore the possibility to mainstream encryption tools. Which is not to say that localization strategies cannot be powerful tools for the internet. For example, if people want to develop internet exchange points to peer local traffic, or if companies decide to have cache servers in certain countries to improve service. But that would not have much effects on external surveillance. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nicola. I'm sorry, Paul, I think.
Hello, my name is Paul Fenninger. I'm the manager of the Internet and Jurisdiction Project, and we had a workshop yesterday on the question, will cyberspace fragment along national jurisdictions? And I want to share one particular insight that I think is relevant for this discussion here. Since more requests, we are with the Internet and Jurisdiction Project, which is a global multi-stakeholder dialogue process dealing with the development of a transnational due process framework for seizures, content takedown and access to user data in situations where users, public authorities and platforms or operators are located in different jurisdictions. And today more requests for those 3 actions are sent directly to operators and platforms in other countries because the current modes of interstate legal cooperation struggle to scale up to the digital realities of the internet. So something I would like to share is the insight that we should stress the need for transparent and predictable due process procedures for access to user data, especially in situations where those requests are sent across borders.
Thank you. Eduardo?
Good morning to everybody. I'm Eduardo Bertoni. I'm a law professor and the director of the Center for Studies on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information in Palermo University in Argentina. Let me share with you some comments and also maybe information. There are just 3 points. First one, we co-hosted, like we did last year, a workshop on the digital safety for journalists with UNESCO and Article 19. It was a very interesting workshop, but something that came up during the workshop was the importance to expand the idea of digital safety not only to physical safety but also to legal safety for journalists. And that means the problem of different laws in different countries that intersect with the problem of jurisdiction. The main problem is defamation online that doesn't have the same provisions in different countries, so if you're a blogger in one country, you can have problems in another country. So the idea to expand, and this is something that was, that I think that UNESCO took very seriously, the idea to expand digital safety to legal safety is one of the ideas that particularly we at CELE, at my center, were working during the past year, and it was welcomed by some people in the room. Second comment, I attended many workshops or roundtables related to human rights and the internet. Particularly, I was a panelist in one related to the Internet Charter developed by the Dynamic Coalition. And my comment is that it is amazing to see how many people are interested in these workshops. Many of the rooms were plenty of people. It's not the case today, but there were during the workshop a lot of people. Some people couldn't sit down. And my only comment just for the IGF is that sometimes these workshops are overlapping with other workshops that are, talking about human rights or talking about other collateral things that are important for us that are interested in human rights and the internet. So this is something, a suggestion for organization in the future. I know how IGF work. It's sometimes a little bit of messy to attend all the workshops that we want, but since human rights is already installed in the agenda of the IGF, I will like to see a little bit more organization on the workshops that are related to human rights. And finally, though I think that it's really, really important to work at the level of the UN on this issue, this report related to this panel related to the Human Rights Council and the report of the High Commissioner is really important, but I also think that it is important to work in the regional level. And a piece of information, we at the center are coordinating an effort of some organizations like APC, for example, and others organizations to introduce the topic of human rights and the internet in the agenda of the Inter-American System on Human Rights. It is, to be fair, it is true that the Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression has done an excellent job. She just published a report on freedom of expression and the internet, but we think that the Inter-American System might expand the agenda and not only think on internet when they are thinking in freedom of expression. So we are doing some activities to try to impulse, to push the Inter-American system to expand that agenda. Thank you.
Thanks, Eduardo. Any other reports from workshops, reflections on workshops before we move to the next section? I had one from a workshop that I participated in, which was organised by ICC Basis and APC, and this was a workshop 139, evaluating multi-stakeholder mechanisms to address governance issues, and it was interesting, I think, in this session that a key theme coming through was that in the area of internet governance, we're in a process of evolution, in a dynamic process that's not static, and that likewise other mechanisms such as the Human Rights Council are also in processes of evolution. These discussions about the internet and human rights are also new to them. Member states and participants there are also needing to look at what's going on in spaces such as the IGF for guidance and input. So I think that was an interesting theme to come through. And particularly that, pick up on Ricky's point earlier, that even in ICANN, which was an institution that really we didn't talk about directly at the IGF in previous years, now there is very direct discussion of ICANN and human rights, and particularly, for example, how should ICANN take account of UN Human Rights Council resolutions, and how do they inform the Government Advisory Committee to ICANN in its work. So I think there are some interesting new issues emerging that also came through there. So it seems, oh sorry, Lee, you want to turn it into me?
Thank you very much, Joy. Lee Hibbard from the Council of Europe. It's just a short remark to say that it's great to have this sort of taking.
You need to speak closer to the microphone.
It's great that we have this taking stock of all the human rights workshops over the last days. I remember when the MAG was planning the IGF, and it wasn't even sure that the theme human rights and internet would be as a sub-theme of the agenda. It really wasn't very on the table from the start, and it's quite surprising now that we have how many workshops related to human rights actually being done. Something like half, I would say, or more or less. So there's something strange in that, you know, it's not tabled necessarily as a main theme, and yet there's so much discussion here, or as usual over the years on these issues. It's quite revealing. Thank you.
Thanks. Henriette, yeah?
Yes, I was going to make some remarks with regard to that and respond to Ricky's points as well. I think overall we have seen progress in how human rights has been addressed. So I've only been on the multi-stakeholder advisory group for the last 2 years, but APC, my organization, has been involved from the beginning. And there was a period when human rights was an absolute unmentionable term in the IGF. And that really only changed in 2010 at the Vilnius IGF, when APC and I think Human Rights Watch and a few other NGOs organized a pre-event on human rights, and we had Frank LaRue speak at the pre-event. And really the shift actually, and this is extremely interesting in terms of thinking how the IGF fits into the established intergovernmental system, the shift came after the Human Rights Council resolution in 2012. That's when it became really easy to talk about human rights. But it is still a struggle, and what happened last year, we actually had a main session on surveillance. The US government, among others, were subjected to public interrogation and attack, and it was a very open, very transparent, very vibrant session. We also had a main session on human rights. I think what has happened this year is that other issues took precedence to some extent, such as the Net Mondial and questions about where the internet governance ecosystem is going. And it was difficult to convince the MAG to accept human rights and digital trust as sub-themes. They are sub-themes though. They are there in the program paper, and even though there are not main sessions on them, they exist, and that means that when workshop applicants apply for workshops, they can link their workshop to those sub-themes. And I do think that the MAG needs to reflect on the demand, and I think there is such strong demand for discussions on this. I think what is partly problematic is that, well, the MAG is a difficult body. It's not an easy structure. But those governments that have traditionally supported digital rights and internet rights issues in the Human Rights Council and in other spaces, also at national level, or that are active in the Freedom Online Coalition, do not, in my view, coordinate sufficiently with their colleagues who represent their governments in the multi-stakeholder advisory group. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But it really does need to be much more deliberate, because the multi-stakeholder advisory group is not in its nature a rights-friendly body. It's a bit ad hoc. And then civil society has a fairly weak presence there, and also come to the IGF with many different priorities. Business also come with priorities. So it's not as if they are hostile to human rights. It's just that it's not necessarily an issue that there's sufficient convergence around without one actually working quite hard. And I think it would be useful for this group, as it's made up by workshop organizers on these two themes of digital trust and human rights, to make a recommendation into the taking stock session that a roundtable discussion of this nature be institutionalized in the IGF, that it's not up to every single year's MAG to decide. I don't think it needs to be a main session necessarily. Main sessions in the IGF, for those of you who attend them, are not the most satisfying in many cases, but I think it's extremely important that it becomes an established part of the IGF agenda to deal with human rights, broadly issues. And I think digital trust is actually, I find the combination actually a really useful combination, because it also appeals to different stakeholders. Digital trust appeals to both business and civil society stakeholders, and governments, of course, have to deal with that. So there are also some concrete ideas that I can make, but maybe I'll come to that later. Some suggestions on how the IGF can deal with human rights more effectively. But I also wanted to report that the IGF has succeeded, and I think it's important that we recognize that success. The work of the Internet Rights and Principles Coalition and the discussions, the increasing number of discussions and workshops at the IGF, contributed to the fact that the Net Mondial statement has a very strong set of principles that are embedded in human rights. And not everyone is satisfied with them to the same degree, but they do substantially affirm that internet governance should be underpinned by respect for human rights. That would not have happened as easily as it did if it was not for the IGF and for the work of the Internet Rights and Principles Coalition. And then similarly, we just launched yesterday the African Declaration on Internet Rights and Freedoms, which was developed by Africans from different stakeholder groups, primarily civil society, but not only. We are already in conversation with governments in Africa and intergovernmental bodies about this declaration. It will take years, but again, that would not have emerged if it was not for conversations and networking and partnership. And I think change in thinking, change in analysis that emerged from the IGF.
Thanks, Henriette. Well, it just seems to me we've got two streams of discussion happening. One, I think we've got some ideas and thoughts about reflections on the discussions around the right to privacy in this IGF that would be relevant for some kind of input to the Human Rights Council session. I think we've got a discrete cluster there. And then I think there's also another cluster that's emerged around what workshop organisers and participants might want to suggest to reflect back to the main session on taking stock in the way forward, including some sort of concrete suggestions around the IGF program on human rights, how the MAG might operate, and so on. So I'm just going to suggest that perhaps we separate these two for the next part of this session and focus on the first one initially, which is this idea of a possible draft message or input to the Human Rights Council. And if my friend at the back of the room can please put the Etherpad link up on the main screen so people can see it. We developed a very simple set of messages that are actually up on the IGF website on the link to this page. Sorry, just get the notepad up. It's okay. He's got the link. And yeah, if you can actually click on that link, please, and then go to the document. If the person operating the screen could do that, please. Thanks. And look, this was just a very simple suggested set of messages for a discussion starter. Noting that essentially that participants at this forum met to reflect on IGF workshops related to enhancing digital trust and the internet and human rights, and we're aware of the session that's happening next week. That out of approximately 47 out of 87 workshops, so far as our own analysis shows, either directly or indirectly relate to human rights or privacy and surveillance, among others, and that we therefore reflected on whether or not a message could go to the Council in some form. And then you'll see there if you could just scroll down, please. Can somebody please help the person at the back of the room to scroll down the page? Thank you, Deborah. There were just 3 or 4 bullet points, and these are purely to start discussion. I think based on this input so far, we'd probably amend these. But essentially the first one was just to say that the right to privacy was a significant theme at the IGF. And some people have already noted that it came through quite strongly in a number of different workshops. Thank you. Thanks to those who are working at the back to get our visibility there. So if you scroll down to the first bullet point, please. Thank you. Let's keep going. Yeah, okay, so there. So the first one there, so that the right to privacy was a significant thematic issue. The words in brackets there are just simply to capture that some work is needed to finesse that. Secondly, sorry, can you just scroll up a little? I need to see the second bullet point. Thank you. Cool. So secondly, that we agree with the High Commissioner's report, and this is a direct quote, which was in the background materials, that effectively addressing the challenges related to the right to privacy in the context of modern communications technology will require an ongoing concerted multi-stakeholder engagement. It seemed to us that would be a relatively non-controversial statement in the context of coming from an IGF, which is itself multi-stakeholder. Thirdly, that we not only agree with this statement, but that the IGF itself embodies such multi-stakeholder engagement through our participation in the IGF, which is a United Nations mandated multi-stakeholder forum. So simply to note that point. Thirdly, to therefore agree that that the Human Rights Council's response to current challenges, and again this is a quote, it's from the Commissioner's report, should include a dialogue involving all interested stakeholders, including member states, civil society, scientific and technical communities, the business sector, academics and human rights experts. This again is simply a direct quote from the High Commissioner's report. And then two additional points. One, urging the High Commissioner, the Human Rights Council members and member states to engage with the IGF, which is a space for dialogue involving all stakeholders which could inform their work. This is particularly a point, I think, relevant to the comments made by some of the participants this morning that the Human Rights Council resolutions have themselves enabled and focused the IGF on human rights, but that also the IGF discussions could be a resource for the Council in its consideration on a number of topics. And then finally, a suggestion that the High Commissioner for Human Rights participate in IGF 2015, which will be in Brazil next year. So these are simply some draft messages. They're entirely up for debate. They're simply designed to generate discussion and comment, and so I'd open the floor. Eduardo.
Yes, Joyce, sorry to insist on the same point, but I would like to see that this group also urge any other regional mechanisms to participate in the IGF 2015.
Okay.
Like the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, not the rapporteurs, or the African Commission on Human Rights, I mean this kind of monitoring bodies.
Please, Henri.
I think it would be good if we can say that as a community that is, or a forum that is concerned with the well-being and ongoing development of the internet, that we recognize or that we believe that that for the internet to fulfill its potential, it needs to, human rights needs to be respected on the internet. So this is a little bit the mirror image of what the Human Rights Council decided when they recognized that for human rights to be promoted, respected and enjoyed, they need to apply online as offline. I think we need to say that for the internet, to bring the benefit that it can to the world, it needs to be governed in a way that is respectful of human rights. Sorry, I'm not in drafting mode. I have flu.
It's okay. I think I think why I suggest is rather than necessarily reverting to drafting mode, that we draw out the key points and get ideas and responses, and then we can work on text. So I'm capturing those points, but please, others. Yes, just introduce yourself.
I am Manavi from Cambodia. I have some comment, and I'm not sure if it is related to this forum or not. If not, please ignore it. But it is what I learned from a few days ago that I attended the IGF meeting, which is the first time for me to attend this. Then yesterday before the yesterday I attend many workshops that talk about human rights, about internet rights, human rights, that we should be respect. And also I would like to let you know that in Cambodia we can say that in terms of journalists or in terms of the right to internet, we can say that we are the freest in the region. That means that people, journalists are free to express their idea through print media as well as through the internet website or Facebook. However, there is some limitation. And yesterday I attended also a very interesting workshop about empower youth through digital citizen. That there are many of young people from different countries, most are developing countries. They talk about freedom of expression, about how they use Facebook. They talk about that they are free to use Facebook. But I see the absence of the voice from the youth from developing country, because yesterday they talked freely. They have no barrier of freedom of expression or any regulation or policy of their country that impact the freedom of expression of the youth. But in developing country, you can see that many young people go to blog or Facebook user, they were arrested if they have seen as anti-government or if they say something that that claim as you blame or you destroy the reputation of other people. So I think for the next IGF meeting, my proposal is that we should bring more young people from developing countries so that we can hear from that country what is the freedom of expression or freedom of expression through the internet to the agenda of the IGF meeting. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Manavai, and I think that's a good point for us to pick up for the feedback to the taking stock and way forward main session. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Joy. I think it's a very good idea, actually, to bring such a message to the Human Rights Council. It's extremely timely. 2 points of input. The first is, I think that when we refer to the discussions around privacy here, it's important that we reflect the broadness of issues. So a lot of the focus at council level has been on state surveillance because that initiated the whole process, but to really bring out the range of issues that has been related also, that has been discussed also in relation to private sector. That's one point. And the other point is that since now we have the attention of the Human Rights Council on these issues, I think it's also important to stress that the right to privacy is closely related to other human rights and a prerequisite for those, so that we bring in freedom of expression, access to information, freedom of assembly, association, etc., at least reference it in one of the initial paragraphs, as the High Commissioner does herself, but also to bring that in here, that we broaden a bit the attention towards the other human rights.
Thanks, Ricky. Certainly one way to do that might be to refer to the wide range of human rights related workshops and topics that have taken place here, which would reinforce that point. I think that would do that. I saw somebody, sorry, who hasn't, yes, go ahead. Can you just introduce yourself?
Good morning, all of you. I am Syed Qazi, representing India here. Yesterday I was attending a session on accountability in the internet governance. There was a session on accountability challenges in internet governance. So I think since this topic of this session is on enhancing digital trust and the internet and human rights, two points that I wanted to highlight is, one is these issues will be more challenging and more relevant in coming years because more and more societies will be online, internet spread, because the nation states, the countries across the globe are talking about more connectivity and access and devices penetrations, technology decentralization, then information decentralization, access being online, and so on and so forth. So I think these issues will be very relevant and more challenging in coming years. And so I think along with this, the question of accountability of the stakeholders, be at the international level, be at the national level, so what are the accountability measures being discussed also along with these issues. So I think that will go, along with it, I think it's very relevant to discuss these issues. And secondly, perhaps in the next IGF, whether there's a possibility to engage the national governments with the Human Rights Council, the member states, because in country like India, we have the National Human Rights Commission, but I have never been able to see whether the NHRC has been talking about this digital rights, internet rights and freedom and digital trust and all, because ultimately this has to relate to the millions of people in India who are online and all, and because issues we are facing in the last last 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, we have been facing on and off certain issues of being online, people being arrested and all. So I think this issue is coming up in a big way. So how do we engage these national bodies also, who holds important, significant, relevant for millions of netizens, I would say netizens along with the citizens and all. So how do we engage them? So it's very relevant to bring them on board and discuss. So maybe the Human Rights Council, member states, where I think India is also a member of that. So discuss these issues in consonance with this. This whole linkage exists. So how do we engage those linkages? Thank you so much.
Just one response to that. There are, of course, national institutions do participate. Those who are accredited do participate in the Human Rights Council. And certainly there are a number of national institutions who are here. For example, the Korean National Human Rights Commission is here at this IGF. So I think it's a useful idea to include reference to national institutions in the Human Rights Council message, because they also have an opportunity to respond to that. And I might talk to you a bit more about that, Ricky. Okay, and we also want to spend a little bit of time looking at the taking stock and way forward main session. I just want to get a sort of a sense from the room around the comfort level with the nature of the messages, the sense of the additions, because my proposal would be that, with your permission, that what I would do is work with those interested to just recraft this draft message, to repost it to the IGF website, and then encourage it, use it as a basis and encourage member states who are participating in the Human Rights Council session to use it as a basis for input to their participation, to perhaps refer to it, and highlight it during the Council session itself. Yes, go ahead.
Louise Bennett, BCS UK. Several people have touched on this, but I think it's important that you make clear your definition of privacy, because privacy is really about keeping things you want to yourself. And in several workshops that I've been to, people have said, in many cases, either governments or business, more particularly, thinks privacy is keeping things between you and them. And that's not what most of us think of as privacy, and I think that distinction ought to be made.
Thanks, that's helpful. Any other final comments before we go to the next one? Nicole?
Nicola Zingares from Center for Technology and Society in Rio. I just wanted to touch on a point that was mentioned earlier about the role of the private sector. I was wondering whether there could be some consensus to include the fact that in order for human rights to be practically respected in the online framework, we need the cooperation of the private sector, but more specifically of online platforms, or what are also known as intermediaries. This is something that relates to the work done by John Ruggie, the guiding principle on human rights, but I just want to emphasize that there is nothing specifically applied to the online sector. There are some guidelines on the implementation of the Ruggie principles to the ICT sector, for example at the European Union level, but I think that it would be a good suggestion to work on something related to the implementation of the Ruggie principles in the ICT sector at the UN level. So I'm putting that proposal forward. Perhaps we could include in the statement.
Okay, any other comments?
I think that's an interesting point. If I'm not very familiar with that, but isn't there at the UN, the UN Business and Human Rights Forum already called the Ruggie Framework? That's a track that might be existing. Another thing, I guess we need to decide how. I mean, the current text is all about cooperation and rather high level, which will, likely gather wide consensus. So we'll have to decide, to which level of detail we want to dive into that message. But I mean, I do think that's an important point, and I think this UN Forum on Business and Human Rights will actually be in December in Geneva, so that's something I can share information about.
Okay, any other comments? No? Hearing none, I think if you can be with us, we can work on that message separately and just move on then to the other attempt to sort of summarise and capture your points and suggestions that would go to the taking stock and way forward main session about how to improve the discussion around human rights. There's been some quite significant points made there about scheduling, about perhaps establishing some kind of permanent discussion on human rights so that this is not something that's under reconsideration by each MAG member. I think there was also actually an idea that came to me was whether the MAG might want to invite somebody from the High Commissioner for Human Rights office to participate in their discussions around human rights, whether as an observer or in some other way to foster some UN institutional cooperation. And there were a couple of other thoughts, I think, about sharing best practice. I think this also came up from something that Nico said. So any other key points that people really want us to emphasise in reporting back to that session?
Thank you, Joy. Following on from what I said before about this growth in discussion on human rights and privacy in particular, we also know there's a lot of UN texts coming through. There's a flurry of discussion, like Ricky said. Important discussion, reports of Frank LaRue and others, and the report this year. It's quite impressive, and obviously it's coming to maturity in many respects. I mean, things have to be done, and those reports will go to the UN General Assembly, and a decision will be made, a resolution perhaps will be brought forward, etc., which will be brought back to who? To UN agencies, to governments, etc., and that will take its course normally as it does. Just like the UN business and human rights work is now unfolding. I know, for example, the UNHCR has approached the Council of Europe, and we are now working on business and human rights, but at a general level, not at a sector-specific level yet with questions of internet. So there is sort of a conflation of things. When you've also mentioned things like the ICANN work. There's also the ECJ ruling on data retention, which is an extremely important step for questions of data retention and privacy. So there is a conflation. There is this body of work which is coming together, which may not be fully responded to by normal traditional tracks of those who deal with things like privacy, data protection authorities, which respond to complaints, the UN agencies which take up on that work in an intergovernmental fashion. So I asked the question, who is the community here for human rights? I mean, there's obviously a community of people where some of us are here, or even privacy advocates, or etc. There are certain organizations, certain civil society organizations, but isn't it time to create a community of people? I'm not saying it should be a coalition, but I'm just saying that isn't it time to create, to get these people together, not necessarily also the established organizations, to avoid it just being on certain traditional tracks, that you create a community to feed a sort of a community which pushes things intercessionally between the steps that you're talking about. Otherwise, it scatters and there's no concentration of effort. And there's too many people around the table here, and throughout the IGFs, all calling for similar things and all concerned by the same things, even to do with surveillance. So, I mean, does one need to refer back to the states and to the law only, to UN agencies only, to DPAs only, or is there more can be done by the community? We're talking about the IGF is, in my opinion, just to conclude, the IGF for me is about the strength of coming together. One has limited resources, capacity individually, but by coming together, you create greater consolidation of effort and impact. So what does that mean for this area of work? I mean, what can the community do coming together, not now in the IGF only, but intercessionally to do things, and to come to IGF prepared in a much more concerted fashion. Of course with different points of view, but with a greater voice to maintain the momentum. There is already momentum at this level of the UN. Why can't the community do the same thing? Thank you.
So fully agree with Ali. Well, actually, one of the novelties this year at the IGF are the best practice forums, which are an attempt to sort of move beyond the talk shop perception of the IGF and sort of try to gather good and bad practices on very specific topics. So this year we have topics like spam, certs, children online, etc. And I mean, really, the objective of those forums is to also maintain the work in between the IGFs and to, again, gather good practices from international organizations, private sector, governments in addressing key issues. And this year, there's no really, human rights related best practice forum, and I know that there is willingness to hear from people during the taking stock session if there are recommendations for new best practice forums to feed into the Brazil IGF next year. So maybe something that this group could consider is whether to propose the creation of such group, which would create that sense of community around the topic. I guess it would not be useful to have a forum which is about human rights in general, but a specific issue, whether it's trust and privacy, whether it's more related to freedom of expression and content takedown. But again, I think I fully agree with Lee, and maybe one of the ways to create that sense of ongoing community and ongoing work could be through a recommendation for a new best practice forum on a related issue.
Morning, Luca Belletti, Council of Europe. I think that it is very interesting to explore the opportunity of a new best practice forum, but it is also essential to further develop and further recognize what already exists. At the IGF, we already have dynamic coalitions that since years are issue-specific groups that allow different stakeholders to cooperate, coordinate, and envisage intersessional works. So there are already a lot of examples of this kind of cooperation that goes beyond dialogue and achieve concrete outcomes. The IRP coalition, the Gender Balance Coalition, the Net Neutrality Coalition. There are a lot of examples, and I think that a full recognition of the importance of the dynamic coalitions and the full development of their potential should be the way forward. Thank you.
Yeah, and let me just call attention to the Freedom Online Coalition. I do think its intention is to sort of accomplish some of the things that Lee has described, to serve as a group of like-minded stakeholders to come together and talk about advancing human rights generally online. So I would urge those of you particularly interested in issues of human rights and how to better ensure that human rights are respected online to get engaged in the coalition's activities. Obviously, it's a group of like-minded governments who drive a fair amount of the coalition's work, but there are lots of civil society organizations and other stakeholders engaged too. And I think particularly with the creation of 3 new working groups on some of the issues we're discussing, those working groups are open to participation by non-governmental representatives, and I would urge participants here to consider getting engaged in those working groups.
Thanks, Scott. Henriette, I think you said you also had some specific things possibly for this.
Yes, and I think they build on what has been said. So I think we should recommend to the IGF that there's a regular session on human rights at the IGF, and that invitations are issued by the IGF Secretariat to the Human Rights Council and the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights to participate in the multi-stakeholder advisory group, as intergovernmental organizations do, and in the IGF itself. So I think we've already said that. I'm just capturing that. Then I think we should suggest that the IGF sends regular messages to other bodies that relate to human rights and the internet and digital trust. Freedom Online being one, so that the IGF strengthens its interaction, not just with the Human Rights Council, but also with other bodies, Freedom Online and regional bodies. We can just generalize that. Then I think it's useful to recognize that the Net Mundial principles do make significant progress towards recognizing the centrality of human rights to internet governance, and that we invite or propose that the IGF process, in other words, regional and national IGFs as well, explore how these principles can be implemented. And then I support the idea of good practices. And I think we can propose specifically, using the theme of protection of privacy in the digital age, propose that between this IGF and the Brazil IGF in 2015, a process is embarked on to try and capture definitional clarity as well as good practices on the protection of privacy in the digital age. And linked to this is actually, well, maybe I should have said this first, an intersessional process focused on human rights and privacy in the digital age that will come up with these best practices. But I think we need to stress that this intersessional process needs to include developing country participation and make use of regional and national IGFs to ensure that it is that there is inclusion from that. And then I think there was a very practical recommendation about avoiding overlapping workshops. But I think everyone kind of feels that way, so I'm not sure how effective it will be to put that in our message.
Thanks. Just want to check, is there anyone on remote participation? No, okay. Yes, go ahead.
I keep hearing everybody referring to privacy or privacy as if it were a simple idea with a clear definition. And that's just not true. It's much more controversial than that. And it requires a real look at what it is, what it's for, what its implications are. And it seems to me that at the next IGF, a good roundtable on what privacy rights really are and what they imply in terms of freedom and in terms of restrictions on freedom needs to be done. I think we need to stop talking about it as if we understand exactly what it is. We just don't.
Thank you. It's a good point, and I think it was also made by someone else earlier that there may be these different understandings. And yes, we should try and capture that point, so thank you very much. Okay, we've only got a minute or so left, so I just want to make sure there isn't anybody sitting with something that they've really wanted to say or that hasn't been covered that they want to ensure is added. Keep in mind that if you have anything written in terms of your substantive suggestions, please do send them to Valeria or come to me. We can make sure that they're documented for the main session itself. So any other final remarks? No? Well, thank you very much. Thanks for going with the innovation and this idea that we might develop a message in this way. Thank you very much to the Ambassador and in particular. And Yves, good luck for next week. We'll be with you. Some of us will be there physically, others online and following, and wishing you well and following it closely. Thank you very much.